So far, because there's still a few matches to go, but we're jumping into the next match right now. Unner versus Baad, and two players that we've seen before. Let's quickly go over their decks. What is the matchup going to be? Is there anything specifically that Baad is bringing that is noteworthy?
Well, I see a blood deck. Our first and only blood deck, it looks like.
Funnily enough, Dragon gets banned again on the side of Baad, but he is the only person who brought a Dragon list, or that we've seen so far, that is not Prime Dragon Keeper at all. In fact, Baad is playing 3 very hard and very grindy control decks. His Dragon list was one that was going to end games with Polyphonic Roar. His Blood list right here, as you can probably tell from his hand, is one that lasts all the way up until it tries to win with Temptress Vampire, Spawn of the Abyss, and the other grindy options that Control Blood can put out.
Right. Baad is Baad. Yeah, Baad definitely chose to attack the last week's sort of meta breakdown of mid-range sword dominating the game. He chose to come into the game with just 3 control decks. Like, okay, people are gonna play mid-range sword to get meta. I'll get meta on that and play 3 control decks. So even putting in Mr. Full Moon in his blood list, I think is you know, it's pretty telling of what Baad was expecting.
Funnily enough, Mr. Full Moon is something that I would expect most to see from someone who expects to face other control lists, just because mid-range and aggro lists tend not to go too high on the values of attack they have, but still, strong reactive cards like that seem to make up the entirety of what Baad wants to be playing with all of his lists.
It was likely that he just kind of didn't have a better card to put in the spot and just kind of wanted, whatever in that spot. And Full Moon's realistically not a bad card, really, to put in anything, so...
I find it perhaps a bit comparable to Control Blood used to tend sometimes to play Odin in a slot like that, of a single target threat neutralization. And perhaps he believes he won't need an Odin to deal with things like unattackables or amulets, so simply just throws in a Full Moon instead. Goes for that discount on how early he can play it.
Belphegor. Getting this Blood Moon into Belphegor is very nice. We see a Bahamut and a Mask drawn. Really driving home the whole control factor. Spawn as well is a card we haven't seen too many of. Actually, evolving over a Lux here is very interesting. Wow.
So evolving here sort of forces Unner's hand to do something pretty drastic in return. A 6/5 body is pretty commanding, as only Albert can trade over that and survive. The Geno is just slightly under that. And Round Table does not have a guaranteed out to that at all. In fact, I think it has to pull specifically a Mars and a Juliet, which in Unner's hand is the only way that he could force a good trade to happen here. Well,
right. It could be Baad trying to bait out sort of an Albert. Now that you mentioned that, could be a great play here. And also technically, mid sword doesn't have an amazing way. Like I said, he's basically got to skip his turn here. So.
I suppose the only card that could have been particularly weak against would have been Council of Card Knights. But Unner, deciding between having multiple ways to evolve something to die to it, decides to go in for something that doesn't leave anything behind for Baad to remove. Perhaps identifying, this is Control Blood. If I try to play for something small or insignificant on board, I'm probably going to lose it, with very little gained. So going to bide his resources.
And Baad is probably just going to skip the turn. Okay, never mind. He just slaps down Mr. Full Moon, 6play.33 vanilla. Oh my gosh.
I really like how Mr. Full Moon, in his animated form, like his face and his head is just all shining, like blindingly at you.
He's not one cool, that I've ever He knows that he's pretty cool too. I would have loved to see, if the deck lists weren't open, I would have loved to see Unner's face as he realized Full Moon was the card actually just played. So obviously not a hard card to clear, but this is just always going to be... The board situation is pretty much always going to be in Baad's favor, as control decks, especially Control Blood, are notoriously good at handling anything that doesn't, get too aggressive or get too grindy, and that's exactly what mid-range sword is not doing, so... Second Full Moon.
Second Full Moon, a perfect counter to this, otherwise could build it back up. Emeralda, also a very clean answer. Something I find interesting about how Unner decided to trade that is he left behind a board that was above 3 defense on everything, meaning he could have been trying to eye a way to play around Scarlet Sabura there.
Entirely possible. He also could have just tried not to put all the stats in one place, so the Diabolic Drain wouldn't be as hard of a hit.
Mm-hmm.
But Unner is not really he's not accomplishing much against this deck. It's every turn, Control Blood, as long as it's in Vengeance, can just make these 2-for-1 plays that you, as a mid-range deck, cannot stack up to. So.
Right. Especially considering Midsword is looking in, like, it's abstractly looking in the opposite direction of how Control Blood likes to look, where Midsword wants to outvalue aggro, so it plays cards that are very difficult to trade into effectively, such as Front Guard General. But when you're faced with a control deck whose entire life is playing things that eat Front Guard General for breakfast and don't need to use combat to remove things, then we'll find ourselves in this situation where Unner, no matter how impressive his plays start to get here or how much he gets onto the board, Baad will have ways to respond to it, as he is built to be able to outlast grinding games like this. But that doesn't mean things are lost. He still has an evolution point and an Albert. A lot of damage in his hand, in fact.
Right. Baad choosing to basically skip his turn to develop a spawn there has kind of put him in a weird spot now that Front Guard General has come down. Full Moon, we kind of made fun of him a little bit, but he could make this Front Guard into a 1/7. I don't think he cares about doing that, though.
It's not really an interaction I have ever considered before, perhaps out of the lack of necessity, but I find it very funny how Mr. Full Moon doesn't completely or perfectly answer some things in Midsword due to the attack rising abilities of both Mars and Bladed Hedgehog.
Right, yeah, it could just continuously do that. The Evolve on Temptress Vampire, pretty great, though. Albert could be played, but it won't accomplish really anything outside of double trading here, which honestly might just be his better play.
We see a lot of pressure from this particular spawn of the Abyss, not even in that the amount of damage it dealt, but the large bodies left behind by every impactful card Baad plays just continues to corner Unner into positions where he has to throw away win conditions like Albert just to stay alive.
It seems like he's keeping the Evolve here, just putting an Albert on the board. It's not going to do really anything.
Very little hesitation on this Bahamut. Squashes Albert like nothing else, and Unner is strapped for an ability to answer this.
Oh, there we go. Council of Card Knights, pretty good.
Right. Now, does this council also come alongside the Roundtable, I wonder? In that it is a very efficient use of his play points, but it's a very hard committal of resources if he wants this.
Right. However, that does set you up to get completely blown out, kind of, resource-wise, if you get hit by Revelation, but sometimes you gotta do it, right?
On the side of Baad, there doesn't really seem to be anything that's going to create a massive clear here. He can't cheat himself into Vengeance other than by actually doing it with Belphegor. Looking to draw into something, perhaps. Scarlet Sabura is a very, very good find.
Obviously. Double Vampiric Kiss was available anyway, but Scarlet Sabura sets up a Bane. So if Albert were to come down, he can just Bane it away.
And noticeably, as Baad simply just continued to draw on the same turn as answering, unlike what Unner is having to do, Baad continues to maintain his hand size as he gets rid of threats and bounce things on the board, whereas Unner has to commit something with everything he plays. I'd say soon we might find Unner needing to switch gears and start playing very aggressively at the risk of using too much of his damage from hand in trades that aren't doing damage that sticks. We'll have to see how he plays this out.
Unner's only out at this point is to just keep going face, as, counterintuitive as that sounds. You kind of just have to put blood into Vengeance so you can actually kill him at some point, so kind of the boss fight he has to get to win the game.
So the healing in Baad's hand here consists of 2 Vampiric Kisses, a Diabolic Drain, and the damage negation, no matter how much that might be, coming from 2 Masks of Death. I feel like Baad has the resources to negate or mitigate damage for a good number of turns still coming down. very little challenge in finding outs to these situations as
Oh
well.
my
Still no
gosh.
good time for Albert.
Healing so much there. Back up to 16, and Albert is just... He's looking bad. He's looking real bad. The spells alone just healed back what Albert would have done anyway, so...
Mm-hmm.
Alweed does a pretty good gas top deck, though. We can just make the same board he had last turn, basically.
Alright, Alwidas and Juliet each able to set that right above the threshold of vengeance, still realizing that he is currently the beatdown player. He cannot afford to try to start playing for trades or value as he is so far behind. But these Masks of Death single-handedly can cancel all the damage of Albert. So still we find ourselves in an impasse where Unner is looking continuously through his deck for more resources to continue to stay in the game. But whatever he draws, it seems that it just won't be enough continuously going onward from here.
I would love to see, I would have loved to have seen a Righteous Devil mask develop this turn. You do get a lot more, you do actually push lethal, but Righteous Devil would have closed the game out in control blood fashion. There would be no way for him to win.
Mm-hmm.
Romeo, I'm coming to you.
So now Albert, you know, he's not going to want to go for trades, but Albert almost kind of has to go for trades, or he just dies, so.
Right. As we have observed the necessity sometimes of throwing away damage from hand in order to trade, it seems putting Sword in this situation is just the ideal case for any control deck. Once you've found yourself no longer remotely in the range of any aggro or mid-range lists damage from hand, that seems to be the key to almost every one of these matchups.
I imagine he'll go face for 3 here. Vengeance is already active anyway. So, never mind, he kills the Singer even as well. Okay.
I suppose what Unner is now unfortunately realizing is his Albert
is
there.
lethal.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say
Emerald
it doesn't. Killing Singer doesn't play around anything with Storm from this deck anyway, so it made sense just to go face anyway there. But it looks like it didn't matter in the end, and Baad just top decked lethal.
Mm-hmm. And Baad had an astounding control of that game. I just want to point out that he had the time to play a Mr. Full Moon for tempo, just on an empty board. And that didn't really negatively affect him very much in his ability to deal with things. He had really all the time in the world to answer threats. Seems like such a powerful and commanding sort of matchup for Control Blood there.
Yep, control decks versus mid-range decks. I mean, a lot of players who only play ladder probably don't know this, but if you play a mid-range deck, you're kind of just food for these late-game grinder decks.
Mm-hmm. Unner going to try again. It seems he really is going to need to find a way to push past Haven here. We may see something similar happen. Though, Haven, lacking any kind of vengeance mechanic, does have to pay, usually instead, for all the healing it gets, all the defensive potential it has.
But he does have access to some pretty good tempo reversal plays, like Cudgel. He does have Curates in the deck, so should be fine. Technically still a control deck. He's playing the, to clarify what he actually is playing, he's not playing like a Seraph deck. He's playing a Aether of the White Wing that pulls Cleric Lancer and or pulls Heavenly Aegis play, so. So Baad is looking to control the board the whole game, and, you know, it may not be possible with Unner going second.
Right. The ability to play a Beast Call area on turn 2 puts so much pressure on Sword to try to sneak in damage before that, because it's very difficult for any board-centric or aggressive strategy to push past the sheer amount of size on a Beast Call area. And then after Unner finds a way to do that, which will probably command an evolution point from him around that turn we could expect to see soon, then comes in a Cleric Lancer, and that is a problem for a Sword list that doesn't run some kind of way to cheat it to death, such as Dance of Death or the like.
Well, it actually does with Council of Card Knights, the answer to everything. Acolyte's Light being an interesting choice to put into Baad's deck. Can you think on the top of your head what that could be hitting?
I suppose if Baad is expecting to tech against anything he needs to beat with a control list, that would be the rare occasion of someone playing something like Seraph. A combo decks he knows he just doesn't have an answer to. So maybe looking for just a way to beat it with something.
I would have answered that as Beauty and the Beast answer. Feels bad, man. But yeah, Seraph's a good one as well. Yeah. Actually, no, it's not, because it only banishes followers. My bad. I'm sorry.
No, I have failed in every way then. Another thing I
It
was
doesn't
considering.
actually banish amulets.
Right. Another thing I was considering is that it could be there to answer Mordecai in the case that some control
Oh,
decks just
Mordecai. In
simply
my
lose the
Shadowverse,
ability
I think not.
I've seen some Nepthys lists played around somewhat in tournaments, somewhat online, but overall, Acolyte's Light. Interesting choice from Baad here. Now, the combination of the
Also,
Beast Call
every
area and the
time.
Clerk
How does
Lance-
it do it? How do they all do it?
While this gives him a way to answer the Cleric Lancer, this leaves an active 6/5 attacker, just lets Baad trade into the threats that Unner puts out any way he wishes.
It does, definitely. And he also just has another Cleric Lancer anyway. Or could play the dog along next to that Tribunal just drawn, which would be pretty good.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting
Outside
always
another
to
Council of Card Knights top deck, I don't see a great way of him answering this board, so...
Right. One of the weaknesses of Alvida's command, as strong as it can be when played on the curve, is that it doesn't offer a player significant lasting options to mount threats on the board, no matter how you really trade with it. The Viking is quite fragile, the Pirate does not really have a large stat block, so when deprived of initiative in this way, and Unner still seems to be playing for that, I find, or Baad still seems to be playing for that, I think it could be very difficult for Unner to mount any kind of border threat that would last here.
Mm-hmm. And I actually like that Baad's not afraid to use his evolves early. He's already out of evolves, you know, Unner has 2 left. But Baad knows that his deck has spells and amulets that get rid of followers, 2 of which are in his hand right now. And Cleric Lancer in itself is just very hard to get rid of for Sword, outside of a Bane follower. So I actually like this a lot. And Unner's still opting to go for a board control plan when his opponent is at full life.
Mm-hmm. And we can observe he tries to get the best board he can out of that Alvida's evolve, but it's still that the amount of attacks that this Holy Flame Tiger has gotten since it first evolved on board is getting to the point where it's not only threatening everything that Unner tries to play and develop, but it is also just starting to turn into a win condition for Baad here.
Mm-hmm. However, this 4/3 ward does kind of stop him in its tracks a little bit. Cleric Lancer pass is probably... Well, Cleric Lancer killing the 4/3 is probably the better, safer play. If you go for the 50/50 on Tribunal, you could get 6 face damage again. But I don't honestly think that's the play.
Mm-hmm. And Tribunal here is less reliable than Acolyte's Light, but he realizes at this point he wasn't afraid, as you said, to use his evolution points early, but now, as he is starting to need to convert this into an end game, he knows Unner has 1 more evolve point, so playing to protect this Holy Flame Tiger as though he could get 2 more hits off of it doesn't seem like a very likely way to
never
win
mind.
the game,
Okay.
but
All right.
going for it, regardless.
Puts Unner at 6. This is going to definitely opt a front card channel or evolve, which will probably opt the second Acolyte's Light. And we'll be put in a really awkward position that puts Unner up on the board, actually.
Mm-hmm.
This is also a very awkward play to go for Baad, because Haven doesn't it's not characteristic of Haven to have the ending power unless they're playing Garudas and stuff, and he's not. So he doesn't actually have a way to finish the game, even though his opponent's at 6.
Right. Even if he were to find a Heavenly Aegis anytime soon, he is already being shoved so far off the board here due to Unner's ability to play either another Alvida's or just play his commanders out. Ether does guarantee an Aegis soon, but it just might not be fast enough.
It does. He's gonna have Cleric Lancer Tribunal into Ether Aegis, though, so that's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
If Unner has the heads up here and goes wide, though, it could just get flipped on him.
Right, I think Unner has a lot of very safe plays he can make that both do damage at the same time, as
That
making
didn't go
this
wide at
Tribunal
all.
non-lethal.
This Tribunal
Oof.
could be amazing against him. That didn't put enough stats on the board to handle that Cleric Lancer either, if it hits the 3/2.
Mm-hmm. The 1/1 is something Unner could pray for.
And it did!
Alright.
Oh gosh. Oh no.
Meaning, that really leaves this up to Unner playing out his Geno, which slows him down just enough for Baad to be able to get an Aegis developed on the board this following turn.
Well, I mean, Aegis itself doesn't do anything, and Juliet can be played this turn with White Paladin next turn.
Right.
So I actually kind of like this. He can keep this ward, the 2/3 ward, He's not ending the game anytime soon, but he can protect himself from Aegis outside of a Themis play. And he's drawing Unicas. This is useless. So Baad has to go for Aegis this turn. But this could be Unner's game. If Unner gets an Albert top deck also, it's lethal.
I think in this exact circumstance, these Unicas are actually very annoying to Unner. I think they are mitigating damage that he needs because he doesn't have a lot of damage in his hand immediately. Albert, as you said, would completely change this, but he is simply playing out wards against this Heavenly Aegis in an attempt to stop it from hitting him for lethal as he tries to race for game himself. Luminous Mage could be the start of something.
He also slightly misplayed the order there. These Unicas could be 2/3s if he had played them before the Ether of the White Wing, but it might not actually matter, as I think Unner just needs to go face. But it's so weird to go face because then the Unicas heal for 4. Oh no.
Right. He has some options when it comes to how he evolves with this Luminous Mage. I feel, as you said, he's going to make the decision to just go face here. He's going to use the Luminous Night Evolve portion, indeed.
Right. And this is actually pretty big. If these things had 3 health instead of 2.
Yeah, the damage from the
He's
Knights
actually going to
face
clear
is
everything except for
mitigated.
Aegis. I like this. I like this a lot.
Yeah. Well, I suppose in the end, the Pirate would have hit the Unica that, or the Unica on the right that went all the way up to 2/3.
MS top deck is lethal. Oh my god, he got...
He actually, the absolute man, he actually did it.
Poor Unner, no!
Oh my god! What?
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 Oh.
Oh god!
He navigated that last turn so perfectly. I feel so bad for him. Oh my gosh.
I think you are 2 for 2 for summoning top decks today, MV.
I gotta stop
Councils.
talking about the worst thing that could happen because it keeps happening, dude. I'm so sorry. Oh my god. It just...
Oh
Just-
man. You know what's interesting about that?